Okay, we're back here with my friend Sean Davis. He's a writer for The Federalist, co-founder of thefederalist.com. If you're not already, you should be making The Federalist part of your daily read-in to get up on all the day's events. Let's go now, Sean. Tell me what happened here. There's an indictment that came down. This is a little complicated, some backstory, but walk us through this fellow who was a part of the Mueller probe used against Trump, bundling millions for Hillary Clinton, and has a record of trafficking in child pornography. Give us the necessary details here.
Yeah, so I'll have to start with the disclaimer that everything I'm about to say is true. It's not made up. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a film script for a late-night Lifetime movie. This all happened. So an individual by the name of George Nader was indicted with several other individuals for fraudulently funneling illegal contributions to a pro-Hillary Clinton super PAC and to Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that means they were using straw men to do donations to hide the true source of the money. Well, George Nader is an interesting character because he was actually deployed by the FBI against the Trump campaign back in, or I should say the Trump transition back in 2016 and 2017. In fact, he was traveling around and setting up meetings for Eric Prince, who has a security business all around the world and was rumored to have been a private back channel for Russia between the Trump transition and the Russian government. We know that none of that was true, but Nader was actually a witness for Robert Mueller in his investigation. And he was giving him all kinds of dirt on the Trump transition and on Eric Prince. But the weird thing is, the things we never heard about while he was working for Mueller was that he is a pedophile and a child porn trafficker. In fact, he served prison time in the Czech Republic for having sex with minors. He had been repeatedly arrested by federal authorities in the U.S. in 85 and 91, I think again in 2000. For child porn trafficking. And in fact, when Mueller's agents picked him up during the course of their investigation, they found on his electronic devices all kinds of various illegal child pornography for which they never charged him. And it actually wasn't until Mueller finally closed up shop and apparently had no more use for Mueller that Barr's DOJ finally came in and rung him up and charged him for possession of child pornography. And then yesterday, as you said at the beginning, this guy was indicted for an illegal contribution scheme to puff up Hillary Clinton. It is so wild that you have to constantly remind yourself that this isn't fiction, this is reality. This actually happened.
So the part of this, I mean, there's the Hillary Clinton connection, which we'll get into in a second, but just on the Mueller side of it, so Mueller had to know about all of this. And usually, I mean, the FBI is very harsh, and understandably so, on anybody who is violating children and possessing and transferring child pornography. Mueller just didn't think that. I mean, Mueller sent 30 armed agents to arrest, well, it was really Weissman, as we know, but let's say it was Mueller, to arrest Roger Stone for lying about a Twitter conversation you had with somebody, but they let this guy, Nader, they let it go until Trump's DOJ actually came down on him. That seems quite strange.
It's insane, and it's not the kind of thing you would expect from a sworn officer of the law to do. I mean, think about the potential for people to have been exploited and harmed by this individual while he was given a free rein by Mueller. And that's not too hard to imagine that they allowed him to keep doing this just to get his cooperation because it happened previously. And in fact, in previous court transcripts, his defense in previous cases argued that he should be treated leniently because he had been working with various government intelligence agencies, 10, 20 years ago to help them with their efforts in the Middle East. And if the details of all this were to get out, if he were really to have the book thrown at him, it could really harm his relationships with various Middle East leaders. So it's clear to me that this guy for years, if not decades, has been used as an asset by our government intelligence agencies that were more than willing to look the other way when this man was literally raping children and trafficking child pornography.
Oh, it's just stunning.
It's sickening.
And the Hillary Clinton bundling, right? So that's that just means for everybody that he's pulling together donate. Well, he's illegally doing. Let's be clear. I mean, essentially fraudulently bundling large amounts of money for the Hillary Clinton campaign. I just think it's worth noting, Sean. I mean, what's the purpose of that?
Well, Nader is an interesting character. So he has been working at the right hand of, I believe, the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates. And when he was allegedly taking part in this scheme, it was clear that he was trying to buy influence with his donations to whoever he thought was going to win the election. So if you read a whole bunch of press reports, they'll say, "Oh, he was Trump connected. He had Trump ties." No. This is a guy who is very much cultivating access to the Clinton camp so that he could then go back to his Middle Eastern paymasters and say, "Hey, I'm really in good with these guys. Keep paying me. I'm so influential." And then as soon as Trump won, the guy turned on a dime and beat feet over to the Trump transition to do the same thing with them. So it's clear to me that he was absolutely part of a foreign influence scheme meant to curry favor with whoever it was he thought was going to be in power.
And just one more point of clarity here for everybody, and his connection to why did Mueller find him useful, the child pornographer?
Nader was loosely connected to Eric Prince, the founder of the firm formerly known as Blackwater, who had been rumored falsely to have been set up by the Trump transition as a secret private back channel between the incoming Trump government and the Russians. And it was Nader who helped set up meetings overseas. Naturally, you can do certain things overseas with our government that you can't do within our boundaries. So he was setting up certain meetings overseas for Prince and Emiratis and various Arab leaders. And it was at these meetings where there just happened to be Russians there.
He must have set up the Seychelles meeting then.
Yes, Nader set that up.
Right. So he's this like influence peddler, because there was a time when that was where the Russian collusion really happened.
Yeah, I view Nader, honestly, as an analog to Stephen Halper. You had Stephen Halper going around and setting up these meetings and making sure Flynn was seated next to certain people so then he could go report back and say, "Oh, yeah, he was talking to Russians the whole time. I think he might be a traitor." It appears to me, based on the facts at hand, that Nader was doing something extremely similar.
Wow. I mean, just remember, everybody, your Mueller, your tax dollars at work. This is the guy that he was leveraging in this whole process. Sean, man, always illuminating. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone check out thefederalist.com. Sean's latest will be up there shortly. Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
About our Constitution and its values. And my review of the evidentiary record, and here, Mr. Collins, I would like to say to you, sir, that I read transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing because I would not speak about these things without reviewing the facts. So I'm insulted by the suggestion that as a law professor I don't care about those facts. But everything I read on those occasions tells me that when President Trump invited, indeed demanded, foreign involvement in our upcoming election, he struck at the very heart of what makes this a republic to which we pledge allegiance.
There you have another one. Probably the most hysterical of all the lawyers today, or professors, I should say. I don't know how many of them have law degrees. Professors on Capitol Hill and this tear down Trump effort. And I got to note that she has problems with reading comprehension, it seems, saying that the president demanded foreign interference. That's just taking words and then pretending words mean things other than those words mean. That's all she's doing. The president did not demand, and the president did certainly not demand foreign interference. This is only possible if you take this expansive definition of things like foreign interference to be anything that would be good for Trump and bad for Democrats. That's now foreign interference in the election. This is absurd. It's bonkers. Well, this is where we are. But I wanted to switch gears here for a second. I know we've talked a lot about the nonsense going on Capitol Hill and all of the Democrat hysterics around how the president's the worst president ever and the most clearly, impeachment worthy and all this other stuff. Foreign, where there is real foreign interference that has been going on? The United States and Iran. Now, you won't see much news coverage of this. It's much more important to have these wannabe MSNBC pundits telling you that the worst thing, the greatest fear of the founding fathers was Donald Trump. I think they have that quite backwards, by the way. But that's much more important to most of the media than, for example, what seems to be the beginnings of the greatest challenge to the Iranian mullahs, to that theocracy and kleptocracy in Iran in 40 years, which is going on right now. Gas prices there have spiked. The economy is in bad shape. It has been contracting. They are in recession, and next year's recession is expected to be even worse. And the Iranian people are fed up, so they have been protesting. They've been protesting in such numbers that the Iranian thugs, the regime's own version of the brown shirts that go around beating people and shutting down dissent, and they have killed at least 200 people. It looks like it'll be more like 300 here when they finally start, when they look at the body count as of today. Opening fire on demonstrators, live fire, bullets, just mowing down protesters in different places across the country. And as you know, you don't have to kill a lot of protesters who are peacefully expressing their feelings on something in public before other protesters get scared. So killing a few hundred protesters is meant to shut this whole thing down. But you have a hike in fuel prices, about 50% over the last month. You have hundreds of protesters killed. And here's what, and this was a fantastic piece today in the New York Post on this issue from Liel Leibovitz. While Iran right now is perhaps closer than ever before to ousting the authoritarian, the fascistic mullahcracy that's in place, here's what the so-called geniuses in our media, the policy experts in our media, were saying. Quote, writing in February, New York Times Tehran correspondent Thomas Erdbrink described a nation standing behind its government. Braving a drenching rain, he wrote, Iranians came out in droves to march up Revolution Street to the capital's Freedom Monument for a huge state-backed rally commemorating the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. Erdbrink also described Iranians parading effigies of Trump, but a reader would get a little sense of the regime's brutality and its internal crisis of legitimacy that would explode a few months later. You could hear a similar story on public radio where PRI's popular show The Conversation warned this summer that Trump's sanctions would prove catastrophic. The president's hard measures, the show suggested, would yield the classic rally around the flag effect. Iranians are critical of their government's economic policies, but they also blame Trump for the hardship from sanctions. The same conventional wisdom came from Newsweek's David Brennan, predicting just last month that Trump's treatment of Iran will ensure America remains the great Satan for many years to come. Colin Lynch, foreign policy senior diplomatic correspondent, touted an academic poll in October that found conclusively that Trump's sanctions had increased Iranian hostility toward the United States and boosted the popularity of Iranian hardliners. Philip Gordon of the Council on Foreign Relations, etc. I mean, we just go down this whole list. The foreign policy establishment had no idea that the Iranians were about to rise up against their own government. In fact, we're predicting the opposite would happen, and we're making that prediction clearly because it was a way of saying Trump has done the wrong thing. Here's how the thinking of the foreign policy, by the way, I worked at the Council on Foreign Relations. I know how these people do this stuff. Here's how the thinking of the foreign policy echo chamber works. A few people who almost always are left-leaning and Democrat shills will come out with something, and then other people try to parrot that, maybe add a little bit to it, put their own spin on it, but they want to be within that consensus because that's what the smart people are saying. That's what the dominant narrative becomes. Okay, well, in this case, what was driving the narrative? Trump got us out of the Iran nuclear deal and put sanctions back on Iran. What was the single most important foreign policy decision of the Obama administration? The single most important move was the Iran nuclear deal. Trump has gotten us out of that, I would say, foolish and eventually catastrophic deal. But because they're all little Obama partisans in the foreign policy echo chamber, do you know what happens? They have to come. They know what the conclusion must be. Trump is wrong. What Trump has done is bad. Therefore, their analysis turns into, well, clearly the Iranians will rally around their regime. It'll strengthen the Iranian regime. What Trump did will strengthen the Iranian regime because what Obama did was going to somehow weaken the Iranian regime. What Obama did was throw the Iranian regime an economic lifeline, give it access to foreign currency reserves, much better economic prospects, international banking system, selling its oil. I mean, all these things that the Iranian regime needs to stay in power. How could anybody not see that Obama's catastrophically stupid Iran deal was going to do only one thing: help the mullahs? Whereas Trump putting sanctions on them, saying, sorry, we're out of this thing. You guys are a pariah state again. The people in that country are going to look around and say, all this because we have a regime that refuses to stop being a terrorist state, pursuing nuclear ambitions in violation of treaties and in violation of international law? No, the people in Iran are like, this is crazy. And you have to remember, Iran is a sophisticated country with, centuries of cultural cohesion and, people that are they do put a premium on education. I mean, there's a sophistication, there's an urbaneness to the Iranians. I mean, the Iranian people would be, if given the chance, allies of the West. Not all of them, of course. There are people that are parts of the regime and people that are little stooges of the regime and, the military and everything. But, there is this youthful movement in Iran to get something better going. Here we are at a point where perhaps the regime is facing a more direct challenge than at any point since 2009 when Obama, or was it 2010, when Obama basically didn't do anything to help them. The big champion of freedom, but didn't do anything to help the Iranian anti-mullah movement. But here we are, and the experts got the whole thing wrong all along because what was more important to them? What made them seem more sophisticated to their peers? What was more likely to get them published in the New York Times or, Foreign Affairs, the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, or any of these places? What was more likely to advance them personally? Orange man bad, Trump is wrong, Iran is going to rally around its leadership. Now Iranian police and security forces are mowing down protesters because people are so fed up with their stupid, incompetent regime. Nobody in our intelligentsia, nobody in the foreign policy establishment seemed to see this coming. Why is that? Because, my friends, whether it's domestic or foreign policy, if it's any matter, Trump derangement syndrome blinds people to what is really going on, and it becomes all-encompassing. It is the gateway drug to a totalitarian mindset. That's what Trump derangement syndrome really is.
11 months ago at the launch of our campaign in Oakland, I told you all that I am not perfect, but I will always speak with decency and moral clarity and treat all people with dignity and respect, that I will lead with integrity and I will speak the truth. And so that's what I've tried to do every day of this campaign, and here's the truth today. I've taken stock and I've looked at this from every angle. And over the last few days, I have come to one of the hardest decisions of my life. So here's the deal, guys. My campaign for president simply does not have the financial resources to continue and the financial resources we need to continue. I'm not a billionaire. I can't fund my own campaign. And as the campaign has gone on, it has become harder and harder to raise the money we need to compete. In good faith, I cannot tell you, my supporters and volunteers, that I have a path forward if I don't believe I do.
Kamala Harris, my friends, the most overhyped candidate with the possible exception of Beto O'Rourke. Her campaign is no more. For some updates on that and also a look into what's going on the Democrat campaign trail where she just was, we have our friend Tiana Lowe back in the house. She is a commentary writer at the Washington Examiner. Tiana, good to have you.
Hi, Buck. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's do a little autopsy of the Kamala Harris campaign, shall we? Tell me what happened here. What happened with Kamala?
So Kamala was always a paper tiger. It was kind of dumb luck and good connections that enabled her to win her original district attorney race in San Francisco. And then, her and Newsom have been kind of backed by the same Pacific Heights machine that catapulted him to the governorship and her to the Senate. She was pretty untested politically speaking. She was a top cop, an aggressive prosecutor who spent her time locking up the mothers of truant children and incarcerating nonviolent first-time drug offenders. That was her legacy in California, but she had the attractive visage and the relative, competence on stage. She gave a good speech. She questioned people well. But as we saw in those debates, once she was the one under fire, she completely crumbled.
Do you think the Tulsi moment was something that she just couldn't really shake off?
Oh, absolutely. That was the turning point because, early on, the media was fully in the tank for Harris. They were touting this first-term senator who wound up polling sixth in her own state as presidential material. And really, what was she famous for? What has she done in the Senate? Nothing. And it's not like she was Barack Obama, where she had already had this national career thanks to incredible book writing. She was really just being touted as the next big thing because she looked the part and she could speak the part when she was untested. But she would always crumble under fire. She came across more looking like a bully during the Kavanaugh hearings, whereas someone like Amy Klobuchar used it to her advantage to come across as very careful and prosecutorial. Kamala just seemed like a cop. And so what Tulsi managed to do, she managed to take the talking points that all of us in California knew for years, which is that she was deeply corrupt, deeply carceral, extremely hostile towards nonviolent offenders of all kinds, including sex workers and drug addicts. And she managed to force the mainstream media to address it.
It's kind of remarkable because I know you're from California. Well, what you're really telling me here is she wasn't even really popular in California. She wasn't even
she wasn't. But she was very popular with the kind of champagne liberal who can sit around sipping Chardonnay in the middle of the day because they don't have a job to get to and moaning and fulminating that Donald Trump is president. She was not well liked by the working class in the middle of the state, by the working class in Oakland. That is not who she favored because those are the people she was trying to lock up.
Now, I'm glad you have here because you are going to be more of an expert on the particular subject of sexism than I can be because, of course, I'm a male, so I can't speak to it from the.
You're not allowed to have an opinion.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to have an opinion. I can't speak from the eye perspective, but I did think it was just so classic that there were a lot of allegations of sexism about why her campaign didn't catch on more. I even saw some allegations people were saying about, racism and how the Democratic Party, although Cory Booker is still in this, and Tulsi Gabbard is still a minority, which I think is fascinating. The Democrats kind of take that away from her too. But I thought it was really interesting because when you look at Kamala's campaign, she wasn't even able to dent the support among African Americans that Joe Biden had. So, how is her lack of success having to do with racism? It makes no sense.
No, if anything, the person with the most legitimate axe to grind about the media coverage, other than Tulsi and I would say Andrew Yang, is Joe Biden. Think about it. Kamala was able to instigate an entire 2-week media cycle about federally mandated busing because she smeared the first vice president to a black president as racist for not mandating and endorsing forcible federal busing. She got all the media treatment she could have possibly asked for. Everyone was fawning over her as though she was Hillary 2.0, and thus that's how she fared out. And now the deflection, the acting as though this is a product of racism, when actually, if anything, she got more favorable coverage. And I'm not sure, I don't think it's because of her race, but there's no question that she, in particular, got more favorable coverage than, let's say, a Cory Booker type figure.
Yeah, let's be honest also. If sexism was the issue that prevented Kamala, Elizabeth Warren is crushing her in the polls, and it's not, Elizabeth Warren is kind of like everybody's, hectoring librarian. I'm kind of amazed that she's done as well as she has, but clearly sexism is not the problem.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a sexism thing. And also consider the Democratic electorate was more than happy to make Hillary Clinton their nominee just 3 years ago.
So we're speaking to Tiana Lowe. She's a commentary writer for the Examiner, guys. And Tiana, you were just up in New Hampshire covering the Yang Gang. Tell us what's going on there.
Yes, I'm still thawing out from the first snowstorm of the season, apparently. So that is kind of incredible that there were feet of snow and people were still driving out hours and hours and hours. The amount of people I saw in Western New Hampshire who had driven all the way from Massachusetts just to see Yang in a brewery, just to see Yang at a college doing these town halls. The way he delivers his stump speech honestly reminds me a little bit of Donald Trump. Like the president, Yang reads a room extremely well. He knows how to sort of incorporate a little bit of stand-up while he's issuing extremely dire warnings about automation and about the future of our workforce. I would be shocked if he doesn't wind up overperforming the polls in New Hampshire at least, because that base is extremely motivated, and they'll be opening up their 10th field office in the state this week.
Now, I don't want to make you speak again from the eye perspective on this, but I guess I'm about to, because I know you have some Asian parentage. I would ask you to explain to me if you think that it's fair to criticize the Democratic Party for it does not ever seem to me like they think of Yang as a minority, which is fascinating to me. Like when they talk about diversity and minorities, Andrew Yang is never, they don't get excited about the prospect of the first Asian American presidential candidate, never mind possibly president. Why is that?
The intersectional left, so not all liberals, but the intersectional left has never been able to reconcile two pivotal minorities, Jews and East Asians, because despite both facing wild amounts of adversity, I mean, consider it's within the century that Japanese citizens of the United States were interned without any due process. And it's well known at this point that elite institutions discriminate against Asian Americans when it comes to college admissions in the same way they did to Jews 100 years ago. They've never been able to reconcile that despite that level of discrimination, Asian Americans and Jewish Americans outperform every other demographic on almost every measure when it comes to income, when it comes to professional achievement. And so because they see those outcomes, they just, Jews don't get the minority card. Asian Americans don't get the minority card. So they're just kind of left out to dry. And much less, we see this a lot in corporate America too, and in academia. There is sort of an expectation that Asian Americans will be successful, that they'll get the McKinsey job, but they'll never get the top McKinsey job, that they'll get into Harvard, but they won't be the head of the poli-sci department. Instead, they'll be relegated to a quieter field like STEM. So really, it's quite remarkable, and I think a positive sign of progress that Andrew Yang is running for the top job, and he's doing so as an actual entrepreneur, as someone who understands how jobs are made, rather than these other candidates who have bragged they haven't worked a day in their life creating another job for another American.
Now, I would assume that I know this from friends of mine who are recognizable as conservatives, particularly people who, for example, work for Fox News. You're around certain Democrat constituencies, and there's a tremendous hostility, and if you're considered from a right of center publication or channel, there's a hostility from Bernie Sanders supporters, certainly, from Biden supporters, from Warren supporters. Did you feel at this, when Yang's people were around, did it feel a little bit more inclusive of at least alternative points of view and opinions? Because one of the knocks against Yang and Tulsi from the left has been their willingness to engage, at least, not to agree with, because they're both very left-wing, but to engage with the other side. I just want to know from your first-person perspective of being out there, did you feel like you could actually talk to the Yang supporters and they weren't going to throw anything at you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's because, Yang's whole pitch, he's obviously very anti-Trump, but Yang's whole pitch is that Trump was focusing on problems that clearly the Democratic establishment were ignoring. The correct response to make America great again was not America is always great. It's focusing on the problems that are affecting Americans. That's something that Yang really cares about. It's very interesting. I met a couple, a husband and a wife. She had voted for Hillary in 2016 and him for Trump, but they were both so disaffected by both parties that that's why they were there. There were lots of former Bernie supporters, former Trump supporters, former Hillary supporters. It really was a hodgepodge of people who've just felt failed by the system and failed by the lies of politicians. And it was very, very open to media, and it was not hostile at all. It was quite heartening to see people who really hadn't had a horse in the race saw a candidate they liked because of his ideas, not because of his demagoguery.
Any predictions as we go into the Democrat December debate here for who you think either might really have a moment or who you think might make it on that stage? It's a surprise. Just give us anything. Tiana's look into the future of this Democrat field.
So a that both Yang and Tulsi get their last required poll to make it to the debate, this will be an 8-person debate stage, which I think will be a good thing because, I'm sorry, these debates with 12 people screaming at each other, no one cares, no one hears anything of substance. The 8 people is a lot more manageable field. This is kind of the do or die time, honestly, I think, for Elizabeth Warren, who's been trailing somewhat in the polls to Bernie. And Bernie's, had the support of the squad, and he's coming back better than ever, even though he's a 78-year-old who just had a heart attack and he refused to release his medical records. So Elizabeth Warren, if she wants to dominate that progressive lane, now is the time to strike. She needs to make the case that she'll do a better job actually getting something done, unlike Bernie, who spent 40 years in Congress doing nothing except for pontificating. So I think that's obviously a big deal. It's just going to be another instance of, can Biden manage to make it 3 hours without talking about corn poppers, hairy legs? And hopefully, if a candidate like Amy Klobuchar, who also could occupy that center lane, if she wants to make it to the top, she needs to start throwing some punches.
Tiana Lowe, everybody, Washington Examiner for her latest. You can also follow her on Twitter at Tiana Lowe. Tiana, thanks so much. Great to talk to you. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you, Buck. Bye.
I watched his team's jaws drop to the floor, Monsieur Justin Trudeau says. So we would play that audio for you just because it's everywhere all over the internet right now and all the news cycle. It is a number of leaders. I think it's Trudeau and Boris Johnson and somebody else. Who? Oh, Macron. Macron, who actually does kind of sound like this. So, but he's like French. He's not. Trudeau is like, I am chopping down wood in a lumberjack shirt in the far north of Canada, right? Exactly. But Macron is like, I am spitting in your café au lait while I give you the most old croissant we have because we hate you American swine. There's a different variation of the French thing. I know Trudeau doesn't have an accent. Don't send me. The people send me the message, book, you don't sound like Trudeau at all. Of course not. It's ridiculous. I don't sound like Hillary either. Hello? But everyone knows exactly who I'm talking about. What happened? She might still come back. Do not think that Hillary is totally donezo, because she may still. Whatever. We'll talk about that more another day. But you had a bunch of world leaders here who, came together. It looked like they were being a little gossipy about how Trump took a 40-minute press conference before they even sat down to do the real press conference, and now the president left, and he left a little bit earlier, and. Yeah, he doesn't like what he heard here from Trudeau, and I think it's a fair thing to say that this president does not take personal insults or criticism well or lightly. That is all true. Here is what Trump says. Play clip 3, if you would, my man Brandon.
Well, he's two-faced.
Do you think that Germany is too naive?
And honestly, with Trudeau, he's a nice guy. I find him to be a very nice guy. But, the truth is that I called him out on the fact that he's not paying 2%, and I guess he's not very happy about it. I mean, you were there, a couple of you were there, and he's not paying 2%, and he should be paying 2%. It's Canada, they have money, and they should be paying 2%. So I called him out on that, and I'm sure he wasn't happy about it, but that's the way it is. Look, I'm representing the U.S., and he should be paying more than he's paying, and he understands that. So I can imagine he's not that happy, but that's the way it is.
And I'm troubled but not surprised to see that there are a lot of liberals who, when this happens, they take the position that, isn't it great that these world leaders would be mocking Trump in this way? Guys, when you're talking about the President of the United States and his counterparts for foreign countries, it would really be nice if your first impulse was to root for the home team a little bit, libs, just a little bit. I'm not saying all the time, but, at some point, there does need to be this restoration of the sense of our country, our people, our guy, our leaders. Could be our gal at some point in the future. But Democrats, no, they would applaud, they would laugh, they would love mockery of the president. That's not even in a just a strictly personal sense. This is the president representing our interests at NATO, and a bunch of world leaders are caught. And by the way, what they said wasn't that bad. I'm not trying to be. We shouldn't be babies about this either. But they're like mocking the president Trump a little bit. But what's so interesting is, do you think any of those world leaders would ever have the, I have to find a better word, but gall to say that to his face? I don't think Trudeau would be like, "Excuse me, Trump, I want to say this to your face now."